Hey guys, it's Thorn. Happy April. I didn't post a whole lot in March because, well, we all saw how March was going, so it seemed best to just kind of shut up and hunker down for a little bit and get my own self in order. But anyway, I got a really great question through the contact form on my website a few weeks ago, and I started to write this long ass blog or essay or something about it, and I stopped because I thought, you know what, I really should just talk about this because nobody wants to read like 3 pages of my garbage right now. And anyway, the question, I'm paraphrasing here, but I thought it was really kind of genius. The question was, given how much, especially recently, given how much I've spoken about the notion of true will or divine will or purpose, you know, as many of you guys who know me know, my practice of witchcraft is very religious. I'm absolutely a devotional practitioner, and like to me, my witchcraft is very much about connection with the gods. And at the same time, I have this idea about true will, which is, you know, just kind of like sort of paraphrasing and keeping things in its most basic form, this idea that we have something akin to divine purpose or a state of being that is truest for us, if that makes sense. Like there's kind of an inherent meaning and purpose, and part of what we're doing as magical practitioners is uncovering that and then living up to that, just to put it really simply. These ideas are pretty ceremonial, right? Like you'll see them in certain traditions of witchcraft. It's one of the things we argue about when we talk about the Wiccan Rede, this idea of "and it harm none, do as ye will." A lot of people, like, you can hear that capital W on the will. It doesn't say want, right? It's about adherence to a true will or a true purpose, a true calling, whatever. Like, how does this thing that you're thinking about doing line up with your will? Anyway, without getting too much into that, because I'm sure that could be its own video. The question was, given that and given my perspectives on that, how does marriage fit in? How does my relationship with my husband fit into that? So I thought I would talk a little bit about marriage, and I feel like I should preface this by saying that I'm new to marriage. I'm coming up on 1 year here in a couple of weeks. I have a piece of frozen cake in the freezer that I'm sure will be gross, but we're gonna eat it anyway because that's like the one tradition that we're adhering to. So like take that with however many grains of salt that you need. I'm new to marriage, and to me, what I've learned, particularly since my partner is not pagan. My husband is an atheist, and his background is, it's a mesh of things. I think, like being from the South, like there's always that kind of hum of Protestantism in the background, right? Particularly a kind of like evangelical Baptist Christianity that you don't really escape, I think, living in the South. Even if you weren't brought up in a church, like it always kind of is just in the background. So I think a lot of his atheism is in response to that, and just, I think, being a nerd, being an engineer, being a scientist, like those are, that's how his brain works. So, and I knew that going in. When we first started dating, we were really upfront about that stuff right away. I've been in a lot of relationships. I've been in some really unhealthy relationships over the years, and I've learned that it's better to be upfront and honest as soon as possible. So we talked about religion on the first date. I was super upfront about like who I am and what I do. I gave him my YouTube account. Like I was just like, here's what you're getting. Like, run now, because it just gets worse. And he did the same with me. Not that he has a secret YouTube account where he's actually like a member of a naked witch cult, but you know, I'd have been open to that. So we put all those cards out on the table right away, and I wasn't sure how that was going to play out because I hadn't really had the sort of relationship where that was a positive thing. But I knew I needed to try it just for the sake of my own mental health and, you know, my emotional health. So that's how we went. But what I've learned in having him in my life, having somebody in my life like that, is that it's incredibly valuable. And this is I'm going to start by being selfish here for a second. Like, how does this benefit me? It's incredibly valuable having an outside perspective on who you are and what you're doing. We've got a room in our house that functions as my like personal temple area and our covenstead, and then I also have altars in my office and also in our bedroom. So like there's no getting away from it with me. Like, it's everywhere. And the result of having him in those spaces is that he sees what I'm up to. And when he expresses curiosity, like, I have the challenge and the opportunity to be open about what I'm doing and why. And getting to explain that to somebody who is not a practitioner, who's not interested in becoming a practitioner, has been really helpful for shining a light on what I'm doing and why. So it's a way for me to continue to be reflective in my practice. So just like on a really superficial level, like that's at play in our relationship for sure. He's also really taught me how important it is, I'm going to say this poorly, like how important it is to be okay with who you are in those spaces and like having other people know about it. One thing that was really fascinating right away that was happening was when he would go back to his friend group or when we would interact kind of in mutual spaces, and I found myself listening to him at times explain to his friends what I believed or what I was doing, like ritually. You know, like when it would come up that, oh, like my wife is Wiccan or my wife is a witch, like listening to his understanding of what that means and listening to him interpret it to other people was just really enlightening. First of all, it's always really endearing. Like, it makes me feel cherished. It makes me feel valuable. And I know that a lot of people don't have that. And I think that's something that, like, that's one of the reasons why I chose him. And again, like encouraging that sort of reflexivity where I'm looking back at myself, and I don't know, like it's simultaneously like it's grounding. It keeps a check. Like, you get, as an occultist, as a witch, you get into this space where you're constantly in danger of just believing your own bullshit, like whole cloth. And having an external party there reflected back at you is really valuable. Getting past that, getting deeper than that, I think I'm learning this. I suspected this was true. And actually it was one of my coven mates, one of my initiates, who first phrased this to me years ago. And I really reflect back on how right she was. But I think more and more, I believe that there are things that you can learn in conjunction with others, whether that's, you know, a single partner or multiple partners, but there are things that you learn when you are bonded to other people that I think you can't learn by yourself. And you know, that's true both ways, because I was single for a long time. I got married in my mid-30s, just to give you some reference. Before that, I was single for years and years and years. Like really almost a decade. So like I've lived the single life. I've lived alone and managed property and finances alone. Like, I've done all of that stuff. I've moved by myself. I understand what being single is like. And there are definitely lessons in that that you also can't learn if you're only ever in relationships. But I'm finding that the feedback that I get from a partner and learning how to grow in a relationship has augmented my magical practice in really unexpected ways. Just from a Wiccan perspective, obviously, like I'm a theist, right? We have this whole mythos about a relationship between a goddess and a god, and I feel like there are things about those stories that are more meaningful to me now. I imagine it's very similar to what many people say when they have children for the first time. I mean, I've made videos on this channel about being uncomfortable with those sorts of narratives, but I appreciate them in a way that I didn't before. Like, people will tell you, like, your relationship with the goddess deepens when you actually have a child, etc., etc. This whole notion of, like, you know, the mother and motherhood and whatever, like, for a lot of us it's a metaphor, but for some people, like, nope, we're actually talking about birthing babies. It's a different experience. And similarly, I think there's something about relationships, emotional relationships, sexual relationships, whatever, that, like, you understand on a cosmological level, like, differently when you're actually living them in your mundane life. And in that sense, there are things I'm learning about magic and about relationships and mostly about myself that I don't think I would be able to do without my husband. It's fascinating, and I'm still parsing out exactly what that means. But I think that, I don't know, like, it's gonna vary based on who you're with too. Like, I think the experience would be very different if my husband was a witch, or if he was even a pagan, or even religious at all. The experience would be different. I think it's meaningful for, you know, what I'm going through in my life. Like, it's meaningful that he's an atheist. He has these particular attitudes. And, like, that's not challenging the way I think a lot of us would sort of superficially think it was challenging, where, well, does that mean that you fight about religion, or does that mean that, you know, like, you feel self-conscious doing ritual around him or talking about ritual with him? I think, like, it says something about his good nature and how fortunate I am that he's not like that. But then again, I never would have married somebody who was like that. That by itself took a level of self-awareness, because, you know what, like, my relationships with men and, like, relationships as a whole, romantic relationships, like, I've had a fucked up decade. And there's been a lot of therapy involved. My relationship prior, like, my long-term serious relationship prior to my husband, was very abusive. It went on for a number of years. And after that, it was just kind of like a string of the kind of awfulness that you would expect from a traumatized person who needed therapy. But thankfully I had access to that and was able to handle some of those things. But 10 years ago, you know what? I might have married the atheist who was an asshole about me being Wiccan. Fortunately, my husband is not that. So, yeah, I think that part of, I don't pretend to know what my true will is. I don't think that that's even necessarily something that, like, most people can do, or maybe any of us can do. I think that's very much an aspiration. But I think this has to play into that, just because of how beneficial it's been on every level. Like, the mundane benefits, obviously, but also just, like, the emotional and spiritual benefits that I've had. So I couldn't articulate exactly what those are, but I know that I'm learning a lot about myself and how I interact with other people, and the importance of interacting with people in particular ways. I've learned a lot about compassion, and yeah, I've learned a lot more about what's actually important to me. So this is an ongoing process, but just to give you a little bit of insight into what that looks like.